I really wanted to film outside today, but the Santa Anas just won't quit and my sound would just be... Hi everybody. So today I'm going to be talking about mental illness again. I feel like I've been putting this off, probably because I have been putting this off, which you would think that after my first video, which didn't get a incredibly negative response, I wouldn't be super afraid of making these videos, but this is just as terrifying as the first one, probably because this is going to be more personal than the first one. I'm planning on making some videos that are going to be more science-based, going into neurological roots of these disorders, going into just statistics, all of that. This is not going to be one of those videos. I'm also going to go into ones that are just purely anecdotal, purely story time. This is going to be one of those. Today I'm going to be talking about my process of getting diagnosed as bipolar 2, as well as my personal symptoms of hypomania, which, because of that, I want to put a disclaimer on this video that not everyone who has this disorder has the same symptoms. Clearly, hypomania shows differently in everyone, so just because I have certain symptoms doesn't mean everyone with this disorder is gonna have the same symptoms. I just said that. So let's dive in. As I briefly stated in my first video, I started showing what I believe are hypomanic symptoms around age 14. I say I believe because I was not diagnosed bipolar 2 until I was 24. So I can't say for a fact that these were hypomanic symptoms. I'm not gonna dive in too intensely into these symptoms because this was also a time in my life when I went through a pretty severe trauma that involved other people, and I don't want to put their stories on the internet without their consent. If at any point in the future I do get that, I would love to put those up. But I started acting decently erratically at some points around age 14. And that erratic behavior is very similar to some of my hypomanic symptoms now. Around the same time, I also started showing more severe signs of anxiety, signs of depression. I started having more panic attacks. All three of those symptoms were taken extremely seriously and diagnosed and treated, but no one really picked up on what I would consider the hypomanic symptoms, which were just phases of increased energy, phases isn't really the right word, just periods of increased energy, periods of less sleep, faster speech, really textbook manic symptoms, which I had periodically for the next 10 years. Now, the main reason I wasn't diagnosed, one of the huge ones, is that I went through multiple therapists over the next 10 years of my life. Most of them, I'm not going to mince words, most of them were shit. It's extremely difficult to find a good therapist. If you're out there looking for a good therapist, I wish you all the luck in the world. I have one that I love with all my heart now. She is the one who diagnosed me, and I consider myself extremely lucky because I spent a good amount of my life looking for a therapist that I like. I've been diagnosed almost everything in the book, and I think a lot of that is because there are set symptoms for each disorder. A lot of them have overlap, and a lot of it is up to the therapist's discretion. There are going to be people who might fight me on this in the comments. I understand that the DSM does have guidelines for diagnoses. However, a lot of them do have overlap, and a lot of it comes down to the therapist deciding what they think you are. Even when you're taking something like the MMPI, which is a diagnostic tool, the last word usually comes down to the therapist, which takes me to even, how long ago was that? 3 or 4 years ago, with my current therapist, I took a battery of tests. That battery of tests, with her, it was decided I was not bipolar. What I was not told, and I think it's because she didn't want to freak me out, was that I was right on the cusp. And she decided that I didn't really meet criteria, so we threw it away. I still had unipolar depression, I had an anxiety disorder, I had OCD, I didn't meet panic disorder because I'm not afraid of my panic attacks anymore, but I wasn't bipolar. the main reason bipolar disorder evaded me all these years is because my manic episodes, until pretty recently, were always brought on by triggers. I don't necessarily think that this is extremely normal within the bipolar community, but it was my experience. So what that means for me was that I really only had manic episodes after something like substantial happened in my life. In my case, it was usually onset of relationships, which was a shit show. Whenever I would start a new romantic relationship, I would usually go hypomanic. Looking back on it now, it's really, really clear. At the time, it wasn't. I thought I was just like on the new relationship high, and I'm so happy, and how great is this? But in reality, I was not acting at all like myself. I thought it was that I was just pulling out of a depression because I was suddenly happy because I was dating somebody, but it was a lot more than just pulling out of a depression. I would sleep a lot less. I would have a lot more like pressured speech. I was acting extremely erratically. I would end up like buying them a ton of gifts out of nowhere. One of the signs of hypomania is like a higher sex drive or like more urge to have sexual relations. I go through phases, even outside of hypomania, where I'm more sexual or less sexual, but even though I have a decently high sex drive, this is getting very personal, I don't usually have a lot of sexual relations with other people, and I usually don't really want to, except for when I'm hypomanic, unless I'm in a relationship with someone extremely comfortable, except for when I'm hypomanic. And it was always interesting that, like, as soon as I got into a relationship, suddenly I was like, let's go. Now it makes sense. So that made it really difficult for my therapist to diagnose me because it kind of blinded both of us to these symptoms because we just sort of assumed Nicole's in a good place, Nicole's in a relationship. And my symptoms, I'm extremely lucky. They're all, at this point in my life, as I knock on wood, let's do that. I have a lot of the more positive symptoms. I don't have a lot of symptoms that are things that are likely to harm myself. I do have the heightened sexuality to a certain extent, but it's not intense. I don't have like the driving cars extremely fast. I don't have really intense increased spending. I do have some. That one I have to keep an eye on. I actually got diagnosed based on that symptom. So it was about a year and a few months ago, last year July, and it was right after me and one of my good friends had a major falling out, and I got into, at the time, one of my like most depressive episodes, and I was coming out of it, and just on a whim I bought a $140 camera, I think. I don't drop sums of money like that ever. It gives me incredible anxiety, and I just went on eBay and bought it. And I told my therapist about it, and with the other like symptoms I had, the fact that I pulled out of one of the most severe depressions of my life in less than 24 hours, and I was doing that, was when she suddenly like realized, it was an aha moment, that this wasn't me just pulling out of a depression. This was me going hypomanic. I am, at this point, diagnosed bipolar 2. None of my symptoms are severe enough that my therapist believes that I should be diagnosed bipolar 1. My symptoms don't usually last long enough to be diagnosed bipolar 1. We're watching them very carefully, but at this point, that is my diagnosis. Going into my symptoms, it's hard for me to pinpoint my symptoms, even now. I think it's because I've only been diagnosed a year, so I'm like learning my disorder. But the ones that I can pinpoint the most are the ones that helped diagnose me. So it's the increased spending, considering spending is something that causes me extreme anxiety otherwise. It's the lack of sleep, considering I'm usually someone who needs like 10 hours of sleep a night to function, probably because I'm usually a depressed human, but I'll suddenly get like 6 a night and be like, we're good. It's increased energy. I'm not a very hyper person. I feel like I try to be a little bit more energetic on camera, because if I'm not, like, these would be really boring, but I talk decently fast in real life. I think it's because I grew up in Los Angeles, but I'm a pretty laid back, like, human, and when I'm hypomanic, that's not exactly the case. And making plans, that's a big one. It's like suddenly making like crazy plans. So I think my decision to move to Amsterdam last year was during a hypomanic state. Probably triggered by my denial to get into University of Amsterdam. I got mad, so I just decided to move. A lot of my like trips to Europe, hypomanic. Like something goes wrong in California and I'm just like, I'm gonna go to Europe now. Just book it. Let's go. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that I love about my disorder, which isn't a super like popular thing to say, but bipolar disorder is both my worst enemy and something I love about myself. And it's taken me a really long time to say that about any of my mental illness. But it does, like, when I have a hypomanic episode, it at least pushes me to do things that I wouldn't normally do, because I'm a pretty reserved human. So while there are certain areas of it that I do now have, like, an eye on, and I make sure not to do those things, as far as, like, the traveling and the broadening my horizons, I like that it pushes me. I am medicated. I don't condone not medicating yourself to have your manic or hypomanic state. That is extremely dangerous, because one, you don't want to have your depressive state just so you can have a hypo or a manic state. That's horrible. I would never ever willingly have a depressive episode just so I could have a hypomanic episode. That's not a willing trade. And the other is, I'm lucky, my hypomanic episodes are not extreme. I have pretty good, like, symptoms, so I get lucky. Full manic episodes can kill you. I read somewhere, I don't remember where, as I said, this is not a statistics, like, video at all, so I'm not going to give the amount of years, even though I have it in my head, but full manic episodes take a certain amount of years off of your life, because you tend to do crazy risk-taking behaviors. A lot of people die during manic episodes because they don't realize, like, the severity of their risk-taking behaviors. So yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to not medicate just to have these, even though it can be fun. And as I said in my first video, even though there are severe risk-taking behaviors with manic episodes, it's not usually the severity of what you see on TV. While yeah, you might see someone like charging down the 101, talking so California right now, like charging down the freeway in a car because they're manic. Is that super likely? Like, statistically, you're more likely to just see a random person in their, like, BMW rushing down the freeway. Like, nah. But yeah. So that was my experience getting diagnosed as bipolar. If you have had any weird experiences getting diagnosed with mental illness, feel free to comment below. I would love to hear your stories. I know a lot of people, it takes a long time to get their actual diagnosis, so we should, like, share. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to hear more about mental illness, feel free to subscribe, because even though this terrifies me, I'm doing it. So join in the family. I hope to see you next week, and I hope you have a great one too. Bye.